I showed up to my brother's wedding in the dress I'd spent 3 months paying off, with a card in my purse containing a check for $4,000, only to find my name on a seating chart next to the restroom hallway. Not near it, next to it. Table 12, squeezed between the waitstaff exit and the door that swung open every 4 minutes, releasing a wave of industrial soap and something worse. I had co-signed the venue contract. My credit score had unlocked that ballroom. And I was sitting where the catering staff could accidentally elbow me while carrying trays of the appetizers I had personally selected during a tasting I drove 2 hours to attend alone. That was the moment something in me went very, very quiet. My brother Shane had been engaged to his fiancée Petra for 14 months. In that time, I had become the unofficial wedding coordinator, budget manager, and emotional support animal for the entire event. I had researched venues in 3 counties. I had negotiated with the florist. I had driven my mother to 4 different cake tastings because she had opinions about fondant. And when the venue required a guarantor with sufficient credit history and a verifiable income, my mother had looked at me across the kitchen table with that particular expression she had perfected over 31 years, the one that made me feel like saying no would constitute a federal crime. And she said, "Sweetheart, it would only be on paper. Only on paper. My name, my credit, my liability. $42,000 of liability to be exact, for a reception hall that held 220 guests." I said yes, because I always said yes. Because I always said yes. I am 31 years old. I work as a licensed structural engineer for a mid-sized firm outside of Columbus, and I am, by most external measures, what people call the responsible one. I have a 401k. I have renter's insurance. I have a color-coded filing system for my tax documents that my college roommate once described as aggressively adult. My brother Shane is 28. He has a soundproofed gaming room in an apartment my parents helped him furnish and a history of employment that reads like a series of pilot episodes that never got picked up. He's charming in the way that certain people are charming, effortlessly, without trying, the way a golden retriever doesn't have to work to make you smile. My mother has never been able to say no to him. I'm not sure she's ever tried. The financial support started small, the way these things always do. A loan here, a cosign there, covering a car payment 1 month when things were tight. Then it was the apartment deposit when he and Petra moved in together, because Petra's parents disapproved of the relationship and had cut her off, and Shane didn't have the savings. And my mother didn't have the credit, and my father had declared bankruptcy 6 years ago after a series of investments that my mother still describes as unfortunate circumstances, rather than what they actually were, which was a pattern of decisions so bad they seemed intentional. So I covered the deposit, and then the first month's rent. And then I started being copied on the lease agreement, and I'm still not entirely sure how that happened. None of this was discussed openly. It was understood the way a lot of things in my family were understood, through implication, through guilt, through a sustained campaign of emotional pressure so normalized I'd stopped recognizing it as pressure at all. It was just the water I swam in. It was just how things worked. The wedding was supposed to be different. Petra's family had come around eventually, enough to contribute something. Shane had gotten a new job in sales that he described as crushing it. My mother had assured me multiple times that this was a group effort. Everyone was contributing. I was just one piece. I found out 2 weeks before the wedding that I was the only piece. My aunt mentioned it at a family dinner, casually, the way people mention things they assume you already know. She'd said something about how lucky the family was to have me holding everything together, and when I laughed and said something deflecting, she gave me a look. "You do know you're the only one on the contract, right? Shane told your cousin you put in the deposit and everything." I kept my face very still. I said, "Of course." And then I went home and pulled up every email, every contract, every text message from the last 14 months, and I laid them out on my kitchen table like evidence, because that's what they were. The venue deposit, $6,200. My debit card, the florist retainer, $800. My credit card, the rehearsal dinner restaurant, $1,100. My credit card. Catering balance, second installment, $30,400. My checking account via wire transfer my mother had asked me to front until Shane's commission check came in. The commission check had apparently not come in. My total exposure just under $12,000. Not counting the $42,000 in venue liability still sitting on my credit report like a small, polite bomb. I sat with that number for a long time. I sat with it the way you sit with a diagnosis. You hear it? You understand the words, and then there's this gap between comprehension and feeling where everything is very calm and very clear. I went to the wedding. I sat at table 12. The maid of honor speech mentioned Shane's incredible support system, and I watched my mother dab at her eyes in the front row, and I thought about the wire transfer notification sitting in my email, and I kept my face very still. Shane and Petra's first dance was to a song I didn't recognize. They looked happy. I think they were happy. That part wasn't a performance. Whatever else was true, I believe they loved each other, and I held on to that because I needed something to hold on to that wasn't rage. My mother found me during cocktail hour. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, lilac with a beaded neckline, and she looked beautiful, and she touched my arm and said, "Doesn't everything look perfect?" "It does," I said. "You did such a good job, sweetheart." I smiled. I did. She moved on to greet someone. I reached into my clutch and felt the card I'd brought with me, the one with Shane's name on it, the one with the check inside. $4,000. My emergency fund, or what was left of it after the catering wire. I put my clutch back under my arm and did not give them the card. That was the first decision I had made for myself in 14 months. It felt like something shifting in my chest, like a door swinging open. I left at 9:30. I told Shane I had a headache, which was not entirely untrue. He hugged me and said, "You're the best, I hope you know that." I said, "I'm starting to figure that out." He didn't notice the difference. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and the contracts in a stack beside me, and I started doing what I do best. I started building a structure. Not a building this time. A case. The first thing I did was call my bank. I had a joint savings account with my mother, one I'd opened 4 years ago when my father's health had a scare and I wanted to make sure there was accessible money for emergencies. I contributed $500 a month. I had not checked the balance recently because I had been too busy coordinating a wedding I was apparently funding alone. The balance was $340. There should have been close to $24,000. I clicked through the transaction history with the particular feeling of a person watching a car accident they had somehow predicted and failed to prevent. Withdrawals going back 11 months. Irregular amounts, 300 here, 800 there. Then larger, 2,000, 3,000. All made by my mother, the co-holder, which was entirely legal and entirely devastating. The largest single withdrawal, $4,500, was dated the same week Shane and Petra had announced their engagement. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I opened a spreadsheet. To understand why I had let this go on for so long, you have to understand what it felt like to grow up as the practical one in a family that treated practicality like a service rather than a personality. My father is a kind man who makes terrible decisions and then becomes very quiet afterward, leaving my mother to manage the consequences, and my mother manages consequences by redistributing them to whoever is closest and least likely to object. When I was 12, I started helping with the household budget because my mother said I was so good with numbers. When I was 17, I got a job to cover my own school expenses because the family finances were complicated. When I got my engineering degree, my mother told her friends I was going to be the one who kept the family afloat. She was not being metaphorical. Shane, 3 years younger, existed in a different gravitational field. He didn't keep things afloat. He was the thing everyone else kept afloat. He was the dream my parents had deferred for themselves, the effortless success story they needed to believe in, and it was easier for everyone, including Shane, to let me be the foundation so that he could be the skyline. I understood this. I had understood it for years. Understanding it had not stopped me from saying yes every time someone needed something. I thought about the seating chart. Table 12. The restroom hallway. I had paid for that table. I had, technically, paid for every table in that room. I called my cousin Brooke on Sunday morning because she works in HR and has the specific kind of organized, unsentimental intelligence that I needed. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How much do you want to recover versus how much do you want to burn down?" "I want to do both," I said, "but strategically." "Okay," she said, "start with the joint account. Can you remove yourself or close it?" I could. I did, that morning. I transferred the remaining $340 to my personal account, not because $340 was meaningful, but because it was mine, and then I closed the account. The bank sent a confirmation email at 11:47 a.m. At 11:47 a.m., my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. I was already on to the next item. The venue contract. I was listed as the primary guarantor, which meant I was also the primary contact, which meant I had the right to make changes to the account. I called the venue's business office, and I spoke to the events coordinator, a calm and efficient woman, and I explained that I needed to discuss the liability transfer process. I was very professional. I used words like collateral reassignment and guarantor substitution. The coordinator explained, very patiently, that the primary guarantor could initiate a transfer of liability with the consent of the venue and the assumption of a new qualified guarantor. Shane had recently started a new sales job. He had described it to the entire family as serious money. He would be fine. I initiated the paperwork. I called my father on Monday, not because I trusted him exactly, but because I had learned from the original video analysis, from my own experience of how these systems work, that you cannot dismantle something by attacking it from the outside. You have to find the crack in the foundation and work from there. My father was the crack. We met at a diner near his office. He looked the way he always looked. Slightly tired, slightly relieved to be away from the house, slightly guilty in the way of a man who has given up trying to be better and made a kind of peace with that. I sat across from him and put my phone on the table, face down, and I said, "Dad, I need you to tell me exactly what Mom did with the money." He looked at his coffee cup. "What money?" "The joint savings account. $23,000. I need to know where it went." There was a long pause. The diner was nearly empty. A cook dropped something in the kitchen, and the sound rang out like punctuation. "She said it was for the wedding," he said finally. "And some of it was for the house. The roof had that issue. And I think some of it was for Shane's car." Shane's car. He needed something reliable for the new job. I looked at my father. He was 61 years old, and he was looking at his coffee cup like it might offer him something no one else had. "Dad," I said quietly, "did you know it was my account?" He looked up, and in his face I saw the answer before he said it. A complicated shifting of guilt and defensiveness, and something that might have been shame. "She said you'd said it was okay. She said you two had talked about it." We had not talked about it. We had never talked about it. My mother had told my father that I had given permission, and my father had not called me to confirm. Because confirming would have required him to have a conversation my mother didn't want him to have, and 34 years of marriage had taught him to not have those conversations. I showed him my phone, the transaction history, the dates, the amounts. The $4,500 withdrawal the week of the engagement announcement. He went very gray. "She said you were fine," he said. "She said you made good money and this was what family did." "Did you ask me?" He didn't answer. "Did you ask me even once?" He put his head in his hands. Not dramatically, the way my mother would have, but quietly, heavily, like a man setting down something he'd been carrying for too long. "I didn't want to know," he said. "That's the truth. I didn't want to know because if I knew I'd have to do something about it." I had not planned on what I said next. It came out of somewhere I hadn't accessed before, calm and clear and completely certain. "That ends now," I said. "I need you to do something about it. I need you to be in the room when I talk to Mom. Not on her side. Not on my side. Just present. Just honest." He looked up. "She'll never forgive me." "She's been spending my money for 11 months, I said. "I'm not sure forgiveness is the framework we're working in." He came. My mother did not know we were coming together. She was in the kitchen when we walked in, making the particular kind of elaborate Sunday meal she made when she wanted to feel in control of something, and she looked up when we walked in and her face did 3 different things in quick succession. Pleased to see my father. Surprised to see me. Something else, something careful and calculating when she saw us together. This is a nice surprise, she said, with the specific brightness of someone who has identified a threat and is deciding how to respond to it. I sat down at the kitchen table. I closed the joint account, I said. I want to talk about where the money went. The brightness clicked off. I don't know what you think you know, she said, putting down the wooden spoon. But that account was for family emergencies, and this family has had emergencies. $23,000 worth. The wedding cost money, Colleen. Flowers cost money. Your father's medication, Mom. I kept my voice level. It was not difficult. I had been preparing for this conversation for 3 days, and I had built it the way I built load-bearing structures, carefully accounting for every force that would push against it. I have the transaction history. I have the dates. I have the amounts. I'm not here to argue about whether the expenses were real. I'm here to tell you that money was mine, you withdrew it without asking me, and I would like to understand how you'd like to make this right. She looked at my father. It was the look she always gave him, the particular silent instruction that meant, back me up, handle this, be useful. My father looked at the table. He did not back her up. This was, I could see, a new experience for her. I don't have that kind of money, she said, pivoting, her voice shifting from defensive to wounded with the speed of someone who had practiced this transition. We don't have savings. You know that. You know what things have been like since your father's situation. I was doing what I had to do for this family. You were doing what you had to do with my money, I said, without my consent. You would have said no. The honesty of it was almost breathtaking. She said it plainly, without apparent awareness of what she was admitting. You would have said no, so I didn't ask, as if my consent were an obstacle to be managed rather than a boundary to be respected. Yes, I said. I would have said no. That's the point. My mother looked at me with the expression I had spent 31 years trying to avoid, provoking, disappointed, wounded, faintly contemptuous, the look that said I was being difficult in a way that reflected poorly on my character. I had organized her son's wedding. I had co-signed a $42,000 venue contract. I had sat at table 12 next to the restroom hallway and said nothing. It didn't work this time. I've also initiated a liability transfer on the venue contract, I said. Shane's name will replace mine as the primary guarantor. He'll need to go in with his employment documentation and current pay stubs. The venue coordinator is expecting his call. My mother's eyes went sharp. You can't do that. I already did. Shane doesn't have the credit for that. Then he'll need to work that out with the venue. They could void the contract. We could lose the deposit. The wedding already happened, Mom. She stared at me. My father stared at the table. The pot on the stove behind her began to bubble, and none of us moved to attend to it. I'm not doing this to punish anyone, I said. I'm doing this because I've been functioning as a financial resource for this family for over a decade, and no one asked me, and I'm not able to do it anymore. I need to rebuild my savings. I need my credit to reflect my actual life. And I need to know that if something happens to me, my emergency fund exists for my emergencies. My mother said something then that I think was intended to be devastating. She said, "You're going to end up alone, Colleen. You're going to push everyone away, and you're going to end up completely alone, and you'll realize too late that family is all you have." I thought about table 12. I've been the loneliest person in every room for years, I said. At least now I'll have money. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I looked at my father, who finally looked back at me, and in his face was something I hadn't seen before, or hadn't let myself see, a particular sorrow that was not about the situation, but about himself. About all the times he had looked at his coffee cup instead of at me. "Take care of the pot," I said to him. "It's boiling over." I walked out. The fallout was not quiet. My mother called my aunt, my grandmother, 2 cousins, and somehow a woman from her church group who had met me exactly once at a holiday party. By Tuesday, I had received 4 text messages calling me selfish. 2 voicemails implying I was having some kind of breakdown, and a Facebook message from my grandmother that said only, "Family is a blessing. Don't forget," with a heart emoji that somehow made it worse. Shane called on Wednesday. I almost didn't pick up. I did because I needed to tell him about the venue liability transfer, and because some part of me was not done hoping that he was capable of surprising me. "Mom says you're going through something," he said when I answered. "I'm not going through something," I said. "I'm going through your financial records as they relate to my bank account." A pause. "Look, I didn't know about the savings account. I want to be clear about that. I didn't know where the money was coming from." "Did you ask?" Another pause. Longer. "I figured it was family money." "It was my money, Shane. I earned it. I saved it. It had my name on it." "Did you wonder at any point where the deposit came from? The catering advance? Any of it?" His voice got quieter. "I thought Mom handled it." "Mom handled it with my account." Silence. The kind of silence that isn't absence but presence. The specific weight of a person encountering information they had been successfully not knowing and can no longer not know. "I didn't know that," he said finally. "I swear I didn't know the account was yours." "I believe you," I said. And I did, which was its own kind of complicated. Shane hadn't stolen from me. He had simply occupied the space of someone who was being stolen from on his behalf. Comfortable and oblivious in the way that beneficiaries often are. "The venue needs you to come in," I said. "You're assuming the guarantee. Bring your 2 most recent pay stubs and a letter from your employer. Ask for Gina at the events desk. She's expecting you." "Colleen, I'm not angry with you," I said. "I need you to understand that I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because I have to. But I need you to do this part yourself." He went to the venue. I know because Gina texted me, per the note I'd left in the file, to confirm the transfer had been completed. Shane's credit was thin, but sufficient. He managed it. 3 weeks after the wedding, my father called me, not to defend my mother or negotiate on her behalf. He called from his cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon, which meant he was not at home, and he said, "I want to apologize. Not for your mother. For me. For every time I looked the other direction, because it was easier than looking at what was happening." I didn't say it was okay. It wasn't okay. It wasn't okay. But I didn't hang up either. We talked for 40 minutes. He told me things I hadn't known, or hadn't let myself know, about the years after his bankruptcy, about the shame of it, about the way he'd let my mother take over the management of the family, because she was better at action than he was, and he was better at absence. He told me he'd known, on some level, that I was carrying more than my share. He told me he'd told himself it was temporary, a bridge, a short-term arrangement that had somehow become permanent while he wasn't paying attention. "I'm going to pay you back," he said. "I don't know how long it'll take. I'm 61 and I'm not exactly liquid. But I want there to be a number I'm working toward." I thought about that. I thought about what it means to hold someone accountable versus what it means to punish them, and whether those things are different when the person is someone you love, or used to love, or still love in the complicated way you love people who have disappointed you so thoroughly you've lost track of who they were before the disappointment. "Let's say the emergency fund," I said. "Whatever you're able to put toward it, I'll keep a record." He said, "Okay." "Dad," I said, "you're going to have to figure out what comes next with Mom. That's not something I can help with. But whatever you decide, I need you to make the decision yourself." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's already looking at this like you're the one who did something wrong. She's going to look at it that way for a long time," I said. "Maybe forever. I can't change that. I stopped being able to change that a long time ago. My mother and I have not spoken since that Sunday in the kitchen. I don't know if we'll speak next week or next year or at the next family event someone requires us both to attend. I have thought a lot about whether I'm waiting for her to apologize or whether I've simply stopped waiting entirely, which are very different things that feel similar from the inside. What I know is this. I went to the venue last month to pick up the last of the documentation for my files. Gina at the events desk recognized me and said, "You must be so proud. It was a beautiful wedding." I said that it was. On the way out, I passed the ballroom empty and rearranged for another event, the tables in different configurations, no seating chart posted yet. I stood in the doorway for a moment. All those tables, hundreds of chairs, someone else's names on them, someone else's arrangement. I thought about table 12, and I thought about who put me there, and I thought about all the years I had arranged myself around the comfort of people who were deciding where I fit without asking me, and I thought about how that was over now, not because I had won anything or destroyed anything, but because I had simply stopped letting other people decide where I sat. I walked back out into the parking lot, got in my car, drove home. The emergency fund has $43 in it right now. My father sent the first check last week, $200 in a plain envelope with nothing written inside except the check and his signature. I deposited it and noted it in the spreadsheet I'm keeping. It's a start. Everything starts somewhere. The important thing is that this time I get to decide what we're building.